You're audible.
नीला मैम को तो सेकंड वो है, वो फर्स्ट में आ गई है सेकंड। Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of Hisicon. I welcome you all on behalf of Hisicon. And this session, we are going to start the session of Meet the Experts. And in this session, we are going to discuss an aspect of hospital design and construction. This aspect of hospital design and construction has always remained a very central part of hospital management and hospital functioning. But since the emergence of COVID-19 infection, it has assumed a greater significance, and it has been discussed again and again, the significance of various designation of various areas into infectious disease areas, designation of various areas into infection control area especially. So in this session, we'll discuss the various aspects of this hospital design and construction so as to prevent the cross-infection between the patients and also the protection of the healthcare workers from the infection, especially the COVID-19 infection. So as first, I would like to invite Dr. Neelam Taneja, who is going to enlighten us about infectious disease wards. She's, can I have a CV? She's from PGI Chandigarh, a great academician. She's a great academician, and she has published several papers in reputed journals, and she has been a fellow of Pasteur Institute, and she has presently working as a
Ma'am, you're muted. Please unmute.
She is functioning as infection control officer from 1999 to 2009, and she has various international honors and awards, including WHO Fellowship, Wellcome Research Institute Fellowship. Now I hand over the session to Dr. Neelam Taneja to enlighten us with this aspect. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Lubna. Indeed, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be part of this Meet the Experts Symposium. I will be talking about the hospital design, and can I share my screen? I'm not able to share my screen.
Yes, just a minute.
Hey, ma'am, you are sharing your screen.
Now you can.
No, that's, yeah. So am I audible properly?
Yes, ma'am, you are clearly audible.
Okay. So in the 18th and 19th centuries, people lived in the fear of outbreaks of diseases like typhoid, diphtheria, plague, scarlet fever, smallpox, and influenza. And in the absence of specific treatment, isolation became the principal strategy of prevention of transmission of contagious disease. The most important example for this was treatment of tuberculosis in the sanatoria. During the 20th century, due to improved sanitation and safe water supply, diseases like cholera and typhoid got prevented. Vaccines lowered the incidence of childhood diseases, and discovery of antibiotics actually led to our belief that the infectious diseases will be wiped out. But in recent years, even developed countries remain vulnerable to infectious diseases, mostly because of nosocomial infections caused by drug-resistant organisms like Staph aureus, Clostridium difficile, and multi-drug resistant mycobacterium tuberculosis, and increase in the population of immune deficient patients. The emergence of pandemics like COVID-19, SARS, swine flu, Ebola virus, which have little or no specific treatment, have shown that the world has infectious diseases have no borders, because extensive travel, these diseases fast reach international borders. Only a few hospitals in low and middle income countries have an adequate supply of isolation and negative pressure rooms in wards, emergency department, and ICUs. Even the developed countries, they fell short of these isolation rooms when the COVID pandemic hit. So when we are planning, at the stage of planning a hospital, we usually say that 2.5% of total beds or 10 to 20% of ICU beds may be dedicated to infectious diseases. But this depends upon the clinical workflow and type of specialist units. We could have dedicated infectious disease units like hospitals like IDH in Delhi, where cholera, diphtheria, measles, etc. patients are admitted and treated. And an example is Nehru Hospital Extension at PGMR, which was a 300 bed capacity created to tackle with the COVID pandemic. The two most important factors, one is isolation and second is ventilation. You could design a single room isolation or could have a cohort isolation room. In cohort isolation room, we just group a particular number of patients belonging to same disease and take care of them together. But screening of the patients is very important before your patient is put into the isolation rooms. You could use a rapid questionnaire in which you could ask the symptoms and a little examination like body temperature could be measured. There are two types of isolation. One is source isolation and one is protective isolation. Source isolation is the patient is himself the source or herself the source of these germs, and we want to protect the other patients and the hospital staff. These are required for those who have airborne infections like tuberculosis, SARS, COVID, and H1N1, and these are negative pressure rooms. Second types of pressure rooms are like the protective isolation rooms. These are positive pressure isolation. In this, we want to protect the patient from germs, and especially those patients in the bone marrow transplant units, oncology units, immunodeficient patients. So when we design an infectious isolation room, then we actually, here you see that the supply is coming. This is the bed of the patient and it is being exhausted at the floor level. And this should be, the exhaust duct should be approximately 150 millimeter above the floor. Preferably, we give 100% fresh air from the corridor and exhaust 100% of the air. And preferably we use HEPA filter at the exhaust. If the air is getting recirculated, then you need HEPA filter both at the entry and the exit. This is a picture of a very nice negative pressure room developed at a UK hospital. Here these pressure isolation rooms are at the end, and this is a nurse space reception. You should have convenient placement of sinks for hand washing. When you're designing, this is a cohort isolation, negative isolation room. There should be windows so that patient can see outside, but they should not open. And having an ante-room, it reduces the escape of droplet nuclei during opening and closing of the doors, and automatic door closers should be installed. There should be appropriate signage on the doors. You have to verify the negative pressure by doing some smoke test, tube test, or you could do a tissue paper test. This strip of tissue paper should be held parallel to the gap between the door and the floor in the bottom, and the direction of the tissue paper's movement will indicate the direction of the air movement. And most important is that it should prevent the leaking of the air, and this gap should be less than 1 inch. There should be more than 12 air exchanges per hour. Pressure sensor with alarm is recommended, and pressure difference should be equal or more than 2 pascals. 2.5 pascal is good enough. With airlock, degree of protection is about 10,000 times more than powder dog position, but they are very expensive and also maybe difficult to maintain, especially in our settings. Now, COVID pandemic taught us a lot. Every hospital was short of these negative pressure isolation rooms. So we could create a temporary negative isolation room for these airborne infections by simply putting a portable HEPA machine here, closing or sealing off the exhaust or return air, and attaching the HEPA filter with a flexible tube duct which opens through the outside to a window, and there is an adapter here. Another type is that having this portable HEPA filter machine and this flex deck, it could open into an exhaust return. But you have to take care, if there are more than one exhaust return, then you have to seal those. Then you could have curtain isolation, temporary negative pressure isolation. These were extensively used by the West. In this, you have a plastic curtain. The area around the bed can be sealed off by attaching this fire-rated plastic, because there's a very high risk at fire. So this should be rated plastic sheeting. And intake must be within this curtain, and the air is exhausted through the. This is the example. Now you have to seal around the HEPA filter machine. You have to seal to the ceiling, so there is no leakage. Coming to the positive protective isolation room requirement. In this, the air is coming through HEPA filtered air. This is for bone marrow transplant unit. It's passing over the patient and being exhausted at above, not below. And minimum 18 air changes are required, and the pressure difference should be 8 pascals. And whatever isolation facility you design, negative pressure or positive pressure, it should have access to oxygen and compressed air. It preferably have an empty room. There should be a washroom, disposable crockery, but must is having a speaking panel or glass partition to avoid direct contact with visitors. And within a room, when a room lacks an empty room, you could use an isolation cart, which is not taken inside the isolation. How do you make isolation for tuberculosis? You could have, again, a negative isolation room for tuberculosis. And this is the pressure differential. This is the 160 cubic feet supply of air, and this is the exhaust mode. But if you don't have negative pressure for tuberculosis, you would just have a no pressure room with sufficient cross ventilation and preferably some sunlight, like used to happen in the sanitary. Now you need to have some infection control practices and prevention. Administrative controls are very important. Policies, procedures, and programs that minimize intensity or duration exposure should be well in place. I cannot put more emphasis on triage, very important. And you have to mask the symptomatic patient when it is in room and also when he is being taken out. Preferably, we avoid that the patient should be taken out for all these investigations, but depends on the facility. So try to create a big facility in which these are attached. Proper hand sanitization should be there, healthcare vaccination should be there, and engineering controls have to be there. You have all patients, universal precautions all the time for all patients. That means PPE. You have to have some transmission-based precautions depending upon airborne route, contact precaution, or droplet precaution. Personal protective equipment depends on the kind of bug you are dealing with. And last line of defense will be N95 respirators, like for Ebola we use. These are the guidelines for the use of healthcare workers in suspected or confirmed cases at PJMA. You can see that we have put which area and which activity required which thing. But to sum up, there should be an adequate control of sanitization. Material should be able to withstand corrosion from sodium hypochlorite. High wear and tear areas. These are high wear and tear areas. Specialized theaters and ICUs should be there. There should be channel of waste disposal. Humidity control should be there. Access to examination gloves, alcohol-based drops, trash containers, receptacles should be there. We set up a communication or control room to disseminate the information and instructions, because not all the time the doctors or the nurses will be going inside. And collaboration continuity between isolation ward with emergency trauma, obs and gynae, and labs is required. Thank you. And once again, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I would be happy to take.
Thank you, ma'am, for such valuable inputs from your part. Ma'am, as far as the most interesting part was how to convert an existing facility, which we are having in these times, to a negative pressure room. That was very interesting part. By using HEPA filters, how can we convert an existing facility? Because we cannot have so many of pressure rooms in this pandemic. So it was very interesting how we can use a existing facility using a HEPA filters and an exhaust sealing. How can we use that? Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable inputs. Any query from the participants? Any query from the participants?
I want to see you, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, I think
So
we can take in the end. We can take all the queries in the end.
okay, thank you. So we'll proceed with the next part of our session. And the next part of the session deals with the construction and renovation of a hospital with aspect to the infectious disease. This topic will be dealt with a very renowned person from SGPGI, and that is Dr. Rajesh Harshvardhan. I invite Rajesh Harshvardhan on behalf of the team Hisicon. A very warm welcome to you, sir. And Dr. Rajesh Harshvardhan is presently the head of hospital administration at SGPGI, and he has various. He's a great academician. He has done several projects in his tenure. And now over to you, Dr. Rajesh Harshvardhan. Please, sir.
Good morning to all of you. Am I audible to you all?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you are clearly audible.
Greetings from this Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences, Lucknow. And I appreciate, to begin with, Dr. Raman Sardana and Dr. Fatima Khan for taking all the pains to create this platform where we would be exchanging our experience-induced knowledge for the betterment, for the good of this cause to reduce the HAI in the healthcare organizations. The session theme is known to you all, and the subtopic which has been assigned to me is the construction and renovation when you do it in hospital. So what are the specific frame of reference from which we are supposed to look at it? And I could see, I mean, while listening to Dr. Neelam and maybe Dr. Anju subsequently, there are a couple of things which, I mean, and there are a few more, which somehow are intertwined in all, or is a common thread which runs all along the topic. As he was talking about the pressure, maybe Dr. Anju would talk about, I mean, something which would, it's in sync with my talk, or maybe the HVAC parts of someone other speaker. I'll try to not to overlap. I'll try to go through just from the specific frame of reference, and I'll do it quickly because time is really less. HAI, I mean, in a hospital or other healthcare facility are something not or incubating at the time of admission, and we all know the definition. We all know the different statistics that's available with us. I mean, rate of HAI in developing countries or developed countries, or the economic implications, or the implication on the average length of stay, or the implication on the patient care. So we all are aware of these dimensions. Let us look at one specific case which I came to know while preparing for it, that there was a systematic review of 300 studies having architectural interventions in 1975. Now, way back in 1975, authors concluded that following can lead to reduction in HAI: adequate hand washing facility, availability to sufficient space, and isolation capacity to ensure any any cross contamination. The built environment, and when you look at it from the perspective of medical architecture, while doing our my post-graduation at AIMS, we used to have a paper on the medical architecture. So we study different dimension of architecture from medical perspective, and one of the subset is how this the entire concept of civil engineering and architecture and interiors, in which way it can impact the healthcare outcome, and out of many outcome is how to reduce the HAI. And now it has evolved to evidence-based design, the concept of evidence-based design, wherein we where we do some intervention and show by evidence that this intervention has led to this outcome, and that has led to reduction in HAI to that extent. The built environment encompasses a broad range of physical design elements. This spectrum of space and surface is collectively referred to as environment of care, EOC. In general, these are less frequently a source of microorganism causing HAI compared with others. Even so, the proportional contribution of the EOC as a reservoir of pathogen is estimated or pegged at somewhere 20%. Over the past several years, there have been several studies to show that EOC is a significant source of many microbes. In addition, investigation of the role of the EOC has found that admission to patient room previously occupied by a patient with an MDRO or C. difficile is a risk factor for their acquisition by the next occupant. And there has been many such examples wherein we can prove by evidence that there is a sort of succession for want of appropriate HIC intervention or HIPC, hospital infection prevention control interventions, which has led to addition or augmentation of the HAI rate, which otherwise would have been had there been interventions. There are a few general aspects of HIC control when you look at it from the perspective of hospital infrastructure, and then renovation. We'll look at it subsequently. Like there's a definite role of compliance of hand washing, and which in fact increases with the as the provisioning of service increases. I mean, when there is a provision for hand wash, then the compliance is better, and then compliance is better, then HI is lesser. And there are different norms which say how much, where, and which way. It also says that it should be large enough to prevent splashing if shallow contamination of hands by the bacteria residing in the drain, and it should be equipped with hands-free control, soap dispenser, and a paper towel holder. And hand rubs should also be available at near point of use at each patient bed to the extent possible, keeping in mind the resource setting in which the hospital is operating. Wall sealants. Wall coverings should be fluid resistant and easily cleanable and painted with epoxy. Use of material in finishes. Stainless steel to replace plastic wherever possible, and plastic holds microorganisms longer than the stainless steel. As regards floor, it says that, I mean, then there are different guidelines. They say that surface should be clean and dry. That leads to reduction of the risk of infection spread, and materials should be resistant to chemicals to cleaning solutions to be used subsequently. The wall bases in all clinical areas to be made integral with the floor without voids. Clean, smooth, dry, easy to scrub intact walls. It prevents accumulation of dirt and subsequent nidus. The finishing around plumbing fixtures should be smooth and water resistant, and pipe penetrations and joints should be tightly sealed with smooth finishes. Sterile areas to have finished ceilings, which should cover all conduits, piping, and ductwork, and it should be monolithic from wall to wall without fissures, open joints, or crevices that may retain dirt particles in critical areas. Light fittings should be plus fitting type and it should be sealed to prevent dust ingress. Acoustic ceilings usually support microbial growth if wet, to be avoided in high-risk areas, as the Australian guidelines for hospitals suggest. Rooms are to be well sealed with properly constructed windows. Doors are to be self-closing to the extent possible on all room exits. The gaps between surfaces are not permissible and must be properly sealed. Between utility benches and walls, floor and walls, between fixtures attached to doors, floors, or walls. These gaps are not desirable. There are special guidelines for special care areas or patient care areas in the hospital, like OPD, ward, critical care areas, OT, lab, laundry, CSSD, kitchen. Time may not permit to me to go to that extent. I just try to quickly look at the very critical or pertinent suggestions. Restricted flow leads to reduced transmission. And when we study the medical architecture, we are told the concept of the functional correlationship, the stack diagram, the layout plan. So all these has to be designed in such a way that the flow is restricted, keeping in mind the prospective users. That leads to reduced transmission. And there are special facility design considerations given by and proffered or suggested or recommended by many international bodies. Like in case of OPD, there has to be public zone, joint use zone, and staff zone. And it has been observed that ID counts for 20 to 30% of physicians OPD clinic visit to physicians OPD clinic, and there should be separation for incompatible patients. There should be area for screening and separate entrance for potentially communicable diseases patient who can go directly to examination or procedure room. There should be separate waiting areas for immunocompromised patient, and the air change recommended per hour in such areas is 6 per examination room with 2 fresh air changes. As regards ward, single patient rooms are preferred for patients at risk of acquiring and transmitting infection, and it provides more flexibility as well. Wards to be divided in single, double room, or unit of 4 and 6 beds like rig pattern, and 25% of the single rooms should be equipped with toilet, bathroom, and wash hand basins. Ward planning one should take care of while planning the ward that the dirty utility, clean utility should be spaced for. There's janitor's closet and day room, if you have, depending upon the specialty you're designing for. I mean, it is the road in the clinical area, and there's a separate facility or lavatory at the ends. Nursing stations to be centrally placed. They use the usual norm in the RICS pattern. As regards ICU, there should be adequate space around the bed to access both patient and the equipment. Individual cubicle for each patient to reduce transmission of infection in the unit. Alcohol-based hand wraps should be located within 2 meters from the point of care, and there should be separate designated sinks for cleaning the equipment. The airlock and air curtains should be there at the entrance, and air change should be 15 air changes per hour. And in case of, if one ought to have isolation facility of two isolation rooms per cubicle of 8 beds, that is the HAI. Dr. Neelam was discussing, so I'll skip this part about isolation facilities and ward design. Usually it is a standard isolation or source isolation for infected patient when we have negative pressure, so that the patient is not going to spread to others. Well, in case of protective isolation for immunocompromised patient, when others should not infect the patient, so we have to take care of it. And there are different recommendations. The recommendations for the special gradients, which I will not go through, because it has been taken care of. Design factors in OT, we all know that zoning is of very importance. HVAC will be taken care of by the subsequent speaker, and siting is important, as I already have told you that the functional research is very important when you are looking at the things, the hospital plan from the perspective of medical architecture. Zoning concept is used all over the world, and the fundamental concept is from cleaner to less clean, and it's that way that the pressure gradient is created, so that there is no reverse flow. As we see this floor with vinyl sheet or epoxy, and we should aim at unnecessary projections and recesses in the OT. Coving is recommended. Doors should be hermetically sealed. I will not touch upon the ventilation system design, but because I have seen there is a separate talk on this, but there are guidelines from the ASHRE from the USA. There are specific concepts for the recommendations for the laundry, as to the layout has to be designed in such a way that HIPC is there as in an integral way, in an inherent way. The same holds true for the CSSD. From receipt to supply, the entire flow process path has to be designed in such a way that the structural dimension adds and aids to the reduction of the HAI. Same holds true for the kitchen. We have experimented with in all these areas, as wherever I have worked at AIMS or at the SGPGIMS. Now I'll come to renovation part. I'll share one quick example. When I was working as the acting additional medical superintendent of the CN center at AIMS, the CVTS ICU side was going under renovation, and it was observed that there was a sudden increase in the HAI rate in that specific side of the ICU, the cubicles, because the renovation work was going on behind the ORBO, and adequate barrier measures were not taken, which led to the increase in this HAI, because the split units were installed in that part of the cubicle in the ward. So there are a few guidelines which I would like to share with you that regarding renovation. When we plan for renovation, what all we need to take care, apart from the structural elements that we have discussed, I have discussed or shared with you very briefly in the given span of time, just 10 minutes. Barriers should be selected to seal off the area during dust producing activities. Examples could include closed doors with duct tape applied over the frames, drywall room partitions with sealed seams, plastic barriers. One should dismantle barriers and temporary partitions after cleaning the work area in a manner to avoid dispersing dust, and whereas to protect the patient care equipment and supplies from dust exposure. A few examples of measures which are aimed at reducing HAI while the one area of the hospital is under renovation in case of brownfield projects or in case of retrofitting plans like deconstruction, sheltered by plastic planes, less dust, or good shielding and renovation under reduced pressure, or renovation behind complete shielding, or using the low pressure for renovation to pick away the dust particles, and likewise. Not all architects and engineers can plan and design a hospital. It calls for specialized training. Not all builders can construct a hospital because it calls for that frame of reference, that angle, that way to look at the things. Reduction or increase in HAI depends upon good quality of architecture. It does have a role to play, be it construction or be it renovation. To reduce HAI, the architects, engineers, builders, and users all need to work shoulder to shoulder. Thank you very much for your attention, and your feedback will be appreciated on this email ID. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for such an enlightening presentation, several very important take-home messages. Now, the next part of the session will be about a very practical problem that we faced when we were dealing with the initial stages of the COVID pandemic. That is how to convert an existing hospital into the COVID hospital. To give inputs on this, we have Dr. Anju Kajal, former professor and head department of microbiology, BJ Government Medical College, Pune. She has 43 national publications and various international publications to her credit. Now, I am over to you, ma'am, to give us some salient features on how to convert a COVID hospital into a COVID care, non-COVID hospital into a COVID care center.
Please unmute, you're muted. Please unmute.
Can you? Can you all see the presentation?
Yes, ma'am, you are clearly audible and clearly visible to all of you, all of us.
Then please share your slide.
Okay. Just need to go to the previous. Okay. So.
Slide is not visible. Please share again.
Okay. One second now. Sorry about this. Share screen. Is it visible now?
It's coming up now. Now it's visible. Put it on slide two.
Okay. So thank you to the organizers for having me speak to you on how to convert existing hospital to a COVID hospital. Now, I'm sure all of y'all face this problem. And although Dr. Harshavardhan and Dr. Neelam Taneja have given us the ideal situation, I'm going to be talking more from the practical aspect about how we tackled it to the best of our ability so as to control hospital-acquired infections. So there are many steps involved in implementing this. And the first and foremost is to have a team, followed by identifying the site and allocating areas, staff and equipment mobilization. PPE became a nightmare. The quality of PPE, where to get it from, how to make the staff comfortable, all of this was a big problem. Training is very essential, as a lab and X-ray facilities and protocols for all the auxiliary services. Our core team consisted of the dean and the relevant doctors from internal medicine, pulmonary medicine, anesthesia, infection control officer, and matron. Radiology, pathology, microbiology, and forensic medicine staff were called as and when required, as were the sanitary inspector, the electrical, and the engineering departments. So, of course, the ideal is to have a separate building. If not, you need to identify an area which is away from the main hospital with a separate entrance and exit. And depending on what facility you are going to provide, you need to have all these areas. I know a lot of hospitals only wanted to have just an initial COVID care center, but they had to provide oxygen for patients. And when they became critical, you had to just move them into your hospitals. So this is what a typical system should be. All right, there should be a triage, a stable short stay, a serious and critical, to which I would like to add that a step down HTU is very important, because the serious and critical patients, as they are improving, it is important to move them out of the war zone where there are so many patients dying. It is very important for their psyche. In addition, a dialysis unit is also very important. Now, if you have an area spread out like this, that is fine. In our case, it was vertical because we had a new setup. We were very fortunate. So we could also accommodate an operation theater. So what is important is having a PPE distribution area. Remember, in every shift, you're going to have a long queue of healthcare workers waiting for their PPE. All right? Then you need to have donning and doffing areas. Radiology is very important as a sample collection and a point of care pathology room. Patient flow. Healthcare worker entry should be separate from patient entry. Now, when a patient enters, if he is stable, the first thing to do is push him into the short stay area. And most important, if his RT-PCR has not been done, then you put him into the sample collection area. If the rapid antigen test is positive, then we move them into the short stay area. And if they have facilities at home for isolation, then we discharge them. However, if we do not have, and if you're waiting for the RT-PCR report, we put them in this area, the short stay area. If the patient is serious or critical, we first send them for X-ray if the X-ray has not been done, after which they are shifted into the serious and the critical area. Now, this is what we had, the flow chart in our thing. If the patient was stable and report was awaited, we shift them into, we had refuge area, which we took permission and converted into an area for stable patients. Overflow patients with comorbidities were shifted into one ward, without comorbidities into another ward. And the critical patients into another ward. Once the report was available, depending on whether they were positive or negative, we tried to move out the negative patients and the positive patients based on comorbidities, no comorbidities, and the degree of their presentation. They were shifted into serious and critical areas. Coming to the ward. Entry, ideally, patient and doctor entry should be separate. However, this was not possible, so we had a common entry point. Doctors would enter and go straight to the donning room. Patients would be immediately shifted into the ward where we could not have separate area because of the number of patients. And therefore, we just tried to maintain an adequate distance between the beds. Coming to the donning and doffing room, a full length area where mirror was provided so that when wearing the PPE, they could watch themselves to see that everything was appropriately covered. Charts on procedure in the local language were put up. Toilets and wash basins were provided. In addition, in the doffing room, half of it was a contaminated area where when the healthcare worker entered, he could remove his PPE, and then he moved into a shower facility and moved out through this thing. So his exit was from here. Nursing station was separated from patient care station with transparent glass. A biomedical waste station with the protocols, a nursing trolley station was provided. Exit for doffing room and for removing dead bodies, biomedical waste and laundry were provided, and doors were provided separately. Wash basins have to be provided, whether you put up temporary ones or if the permanent ones are available with adequate soap and water. The operation theatre was mainly for pregnant ladies, and for that you had to provide a neonatal intensive care unit, because a lot of the cesarean sections which were provided were before the due date. If you have a horizontal, vertical arrangement, separate elevators have to be provided for the staff, the patients, for the biomedical waste, laundry, and dead bodies. We provided one lift, and we had the security ensuring that all these precautions were taken appropriately. Staff. Now the shifts of the staff should be 6 hourly. Lockers should be provided for personal belongings. Refreshment for the staff should be provided as soon as they come off duty. And of course, most important is the chai, which we all die to have. You need to provide the quarantine quarters for the staff. And the number of healthcare workers is mammoth. And therefore, they have to be shifted from all your other facilities. And therefore, we have to reduce elective operations and elective surgeries. We need to concentrate only on the serious cases. Equipment for that, we prepared checklists with the help of the critical care and anesthesia department. All this equipment was mobilized from all over the hospital. And as you know, we had to have oxygen supply, ventilators, portable ECG machines, and stethoscopes for separate patients. Training is a very important part, and infection control practices are very, very important. So we had trainings weekly for healthcare workers, for the cleaning staff, for the nursing staff, and for the doctors. And this was done with the infection control team. So hand washing, donning, doffing, we actually had practical demonstrations where we had someone demonstrating how to wear, how to remove, and what precautions to take, where one can go wrong. And care bundles were also covered. In addition, in the areas where all this was being taken care of, we put up the protocols. Now, treatment protocols were also conducted, the training at this weekly thing. In addition, we also put up charts, like in the casualty. I don't know if this is very clear, based on patient requirements, where they needed to be shifted, and what the first aid or first care should be given. Then we also told them about treatment protocols, which were put up in all the wards. And as you know, initially, these treatment protocols were put up with the date, and they had to be changed regularly. Protocols like the carb protocol were put up in English as well as in the local language, so that patients could read it and follow it themselves. This really reduced the burden on healthcare workers. Protocols for biomedical waste disposal were put up, laundry disposal, patient transfer, cleaning protocols, including how often they should be done, and checklists were provided on whether these cleaning protocols were being carried out at the beginning of a shift, at the end of the shift. All this has to be done. Dead body disposal, very important. And we learned the hard way. Initially, we were putting the patients in bags which did not have a face. And then we got complaints. We had a complaint box so that, patients' relatives could tell us how we could improve. And one of the complaints given to us was that the patient had not seen the face of the person who has died. And they weren't sure whether it was their relative. And after that, we started getting bags which had the face exposed. Kitchen was very important. We provided food in disposable containers. And we provided separate liquid diet for patients who could consume it themselves and for those who had to be fed with a Ryle's tube. And for that, we had a protocol where every 2 hours they were given an appropriate diet which took care of all the calorie requirement. Looking after the kitchen, I could help with this. Psychological support. I was also looking after the medical social workers. And these social workers were given a separate training in which they were told how to counsel patients. They would go bed to bed, ask the patients if they had any problems, and these were conveyed to the nursing staff and the doctors on duty so that they could handle it. In addition, with the healthcare worker, with the social worker phones, we arranged for them to organize WhatsApp calls with the relatives of the patients so that they could talk to the relatives, thereby reassuring the patients and their relatives. Healthcare, we provided a separate area for the relatives to wait. All right. Then for healthcare workers, the psychologist and psychiatrist phone numbers were provided so that if required, they could also approach them. And believe me, the healthcare workers were shaken, especially when they saw a patient who looked all right and looked like he was recovering. And at the next moment, when they took their rounds, the patient was dead. It was really shocking. So I've covered the important steps, and I thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such a practical aspect of how to convert a non-COVID facility into a COVID facility. All the points you delineated were very practical and significant, and a lot to learn from this presentation. Thank you, ma'am. Now moving out to the next presentation, the importance of aerosol transmission of diseases has never been so significant or so discussed about than nowadays. So to discuss this aspect of how to reduce this transmission and how to deal with the heating, ventilation and AC systems, we have with us Dr. Bansidhar Tarai, who is Associate Director and Head Microbiology at the Max Super Speciality Hospital, Saket. Over to you, sir, for a presentation and enlightening us on this aspect.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to give thanks to Dr. Fatima and Dr. Raman Sadana for inviting me such a different topic like heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. So engineering is very important for an infection control point of view, like the housekeeping. The three important is the electrical, the HVAC system, that is the heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, and plumbing. So why the HVAC system is important? Airborne diseases have linked to so many it's related to poorly functioning of the HVAC system, improper function of temperature control, humidity control, air distribution, and filtration of HVAC systems. Lutz and et al. Reported there is an outbreak of Aspergillus infections, and they have found contaminated diffusers, ductwork, and other duct materials which are cultured for Aspergillus species. Air samples positive also been reported for MRSA by Rotella and et al. Similarly, Clostridium difficile spores were reported from air vents in your 22-month surveillance study suggested aerial spread of infections. Multiple outbreaks were reported for infections caused by Legionella that is linked to the HVAC systems, including cooling towers, ductwork, and filters. Tuberculosis, once they have admitted in the hospital setting, the environmental aspect by reducing the concentration of airborne bacilli, by increasing number of air changes per hour, and single pass ventilation systems where 100% supplied air is exhausted to avoid recirculations. There are reports of severe SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, in outbreaks of hospital wards in Hong Kong. That means leads to the epidemics, indicating there is an existing correlation between building factors related to air circulation and rate of occurrence of infections. The functional aspects of HVAC systems like relative humidity and temperature were found to have a significant correlation with nosocomial infections rate, especially in ICU and geriatric populations. Once the bacteria or molds or allergens enter the buildings, air handling units, they control their spread and aid in the removal of the system with both droplet-borne as well as the airborne diseases. This is achieved either by the diluting the pathogens like the dilution ventilation or by the removing the pathogens, the exhaust ventilation. And improperly maintained HVAC system can be continually a source of contaminations. And examples which is growth of molds and other fungi in the damp and wet surfaces such as cooling coils, humidifiers, condensate pans, and filters. Poorly designed and maintained HVAC system in the ICU can lead to sick building syndrome characterized by suffocation, which can lead to the decreased staff performance in addition to the various hospital-acquired infection and occupational hazards. So what does we mean by the HVAC systems? That is heating, addition of heat to raise or maintain temperature, cooling, removing heat to the lower maintain temperature, humidifying like the adding water vapor, dehumidifying, removing water vapor in order to maintain the moisture content of the air, filtering, removing dust particles, biological contamination like the bacteria and viruses and fungi, ventilating, air changes rates between outdoors, and air distribution, that is the velocity, flow pattern, and direction of movement and distribution patterns. So maintaining a good air quality is an important non-pharmacological strategy in preventing hospital-acquired infections. So components of the HVAC system, the one is the outdoor air intake and air exhaust ducts and controls. Second is air handling unit, that is the AHU. Third is the air distribution systems. So outdoor air intake and air exhaust ducts and controls, the dampers are used cut off central air conditioning to unused rooms and for regulating the air supply room by room. This can play a role as an economizer that can be placed at supply, relief, and return components of the HVAC systems. Lowers are used for protection of water infiltrations. These are the AHU and So AHU is a function to take in outside air, recondition it, and supply as a fresh air. So if you see the detailed diagram how these HVAC systems are work and the AHU works, here you can see the outside air, then the damper is here, then the mixing chamber, then pre-filter, fine filter, heating coil, ultraviolet light emitters, then the cooling coil and drain, then the humidifier. Last is the HEPA filter. So before HEPA filter, there are a lot of stages are occurring so that the HEPA filter has a maximum effective capacity. Then the conditioning air, then the return air, then again going. Similarly, the economizer extra thing is that the one fan is added here in the return pathway, and then the relief air damper is used. This is a very complex structure of the HVAC systems. So any part of the part is not properly functioning, it can cause infection. This is the HVAC provision for OT. It is almost similar, the fresh air, different stages, and this finally this goes to the OT air condition, the OT room, the pressure relief lower by chairs. Now coming to the heat exchangers and chillers. Heat exchanger transfer heat energy from one fluid to another, which is being physically separated. Chillers are located in the basement, cooled by water, or on the roof, cooled by the air. Chiller remove heat from the water, and then this water is used as a refrigerant to remove heat from the building and dehumidifying air. These are the heating systems. These generate hot water which will control humidity along with the chilled water. These are the chiller plant systems, and that is to distribute chilled water in the buildings. This is the HVAC pumps to circulate chilled water in the AHU. So now the filter is most important, and these are placed to purify the incoming air into the system. Three main characteristics of filters are efficiency in removing various size particles in air, create resistance to flow, and their dust holding capacity. Filters are rated based on the minimum efficiency reporting value, that is MERV rating. These range from 1 to 20, with higher value suggesting a better filter efficiency. MERV 10 will be able to filter 1 to 3 micron size, whereas MERV more than 13 will be able to filter particles between 0.3 to 1 micron size. Medical facilities are usually required MERV 14 to 16. Those filters with MERV more than 17 are called HEPA filters. HEPA filters with MERV 17 have efficiency of 99.97 against 0.3 micron size particles. For clean room, like the body implants, manufacturing site, where the manufacturer is body implant occurs, the MERV should be 20 filters. 20 filtering efficiency 99.999%. So usually in AHU, there will be a pre-filter with a low to medium efficiency acting as a routine filter, removing large particle matters and many microbes, less than MERV 4. They are called just general filters, grading from G1 to G4. They have an efficiency up to 70% down to 10 micron size particles. Their role is very good in arrestance, ability to arrest larger particles like that, lint, hair, and dust. Second, this is called the pre-filters or general filters, are subsequently has passed through the additional filter banks, second bank of filters, with 99% efficiency particles up to 5 microns, with pressure drop not exceeding 20 mm water gauge. Pressure gauge is important. These are called the fine filters. Then the third category is filter is the HEPA filters. The pressure drops at this stage should not exceed 50 mm WVG, water gauge. For particle size 0.3 microns, pre-filters have 30 to 35% efficiency, whereas post-filters, the final HEPA filters, have 99.7% efficiency. So inline disposable pre-filters are used to increase the lifespan of HEPA filters. That means pre-filter is also important. This concept of progressive filtration increases the lifespan of HEPA filters. So during outbreaks, the concentration of airborne Aspergillus conidia patients can go to 100 conidia per square meter, whereas in rooms with HEPA filtration, there is 0.1 CFU per square meter reported. Guidelines for infection control in healthcare facilities show that the filtration system in HEPA filters are adequate for more patient care areas. These filters are least efficient for removing particle size more than 0.3 micron in diameters. These are some of the filters, HEPA filters. These are the fine filters. These are the pre-filters. So coming to the ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is used germicidal irradiation agents to reduce the virulence of microorganisms. This is usually used in the exhaust air ducts of HVAC system to supplement the HEPA filtration. Coming to the air distribution system. It can be full fresh air or single pass systems like the displacement ventilation or the traditional recirculation type like the mixing ventilation systems where recirculating air requires adequate filtrations. Displacement ventilation has an advantage like better acoustic and less noise, lower pressure drops and lower energy consumptions, require low grade of filtration and high ventilative efficiency as 100% fresh air is delivered to the occupants. Air velocity and distribution also play an important role in air distribution systems. The preferential path is that the laminar airflow pattern from clean to dirty processes, diverting this particle to the exhaust grill rather than the turbulence patterns. Supply and return air ducts, these are usually made up of non-corrosive materials. Return air ducts carries airs from conditioned space to the mixing chamber. These are some of the air distribution systems, ventilator systems, and FCU. So coming to the HVAC maintenance system, which is that is the main important of infection control, which we as an infection control specialist, we should look on. Ensure proper labeling of parts of the HVAC plants, including the direction of airflow, mentioning the outdoor air, the supply air, the return air, then the exhaust air. Outside air intakes must be examined for any dust and moisture. Third is the drain pans and pipes checked for any accumulation of condensate waters. Fourth is clean condenser and evaporate coils. Fifth is indoor air quality should be frequently checked, usually every 6 months. HEPA filter efficiency tests should be checked in every 6 months. Lubricate motor bearings, fans, and moving parts, and continuously monitoring of humidity and temperature in the ICUs as well as in the OTs. These are the difference between positive and negative pressure rooms. So what is the purpose? So type of patients requiring isolation. Born post-transplant febrile neutropenic patients, whereas negative pressure required by the COVID and the swine flu TB. Direction of airflow. In positive pressure rooms, outside the room, away from the patients, whereas negative pressure systems, it is inside the room, towards the patients. Pressure more than 2.0 PA and preferably +8 PA, whereas it is less than 2.0 pascals. Supply air more than sum of the return and exhaust air, less than sum of return and exhaust air. Recirculation 90 to 95% in positive pressure systems, whereas 80 to 90% if required in negative pressure rooms. Air exchange per hour more than 20 in positive room, more than 12 equal to negative room. Filtration efficacy, supply 99.97% in 0.3 and DOP. All supply air must pass through the HEPA filters. Whereas negative, supply 90% dust spot test. All supply air to be exhausted without recirculations. HEPA 99.97% must be used in supply side if recirculation used. HEPA is required to exhaust side to when the exhaust air to the outside is not practical. This is the isolation rooms and the readings. So provision in isolation room, it should be monitoring provisions, air conditioning provisions, exhaust, antechamber provisions, handling of sewage waste and handling of biomedical waste. So on conclusion, knowledge and understanding of proper functioning of the HVAC system is crucial for critical care physicians, infection control committee members, and the administrators to provide the optimal safety and comfort to the OT, ICU patients, staff, nurse, visitors with reducing the spread of infection. With continuous advance in the technology, HVAC systems should be properly looked at and updated in accordance with the existing infection control guidelines, and immediate reporting of an apparent malfunctioning of the HVAC systems should be come to the infection control committee and management committee. Thank you very much. Such a wonderful and different topics, and I think some engineering people should be called for this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for helping us understand how to improve the air quality in our wards and also to help us understand very nicely the sequential arrangement of the journal filters, the flight filters, and the HEPA filters. Now, moving out to the last part of this session, we had a very good discussion, and a good discussion always leads to some queries on the, though it solves many doubts, but it leads to new queries. So to answer any of the questions, we have with us Dr. Anup Kumar Daga, who is additional professor in hospital administration and medical superintendent, RP Center for Ophthalmology at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. So any queries on the part of the participants, we are welcome to have a session with Dr. Anup Daga.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima and Dr. Raman, for organizing the conference. And thank you for having a session on planning and designing aspects, especially from the construction point of view of healthcare acquired infection. Because, you know, construction and hospital designing and planning is hitherto a neglected area whereby we often forget to take measures for hospital infection control. I could see like we have a good discussion with Dr. Neelam Taneja on planning and designing of ID wards. Dr. Ayush Harshvardhan told the fine nuances of construction and renovation from the point of view of hospital infection control. Professor Anju Kagal also gave a good viewpoint of the experience in converting a normal hospital into a COVID hospital. And Dr. Bansidhar told very good points regarding heating, ventilation, and air conditioning controls into hospitals. So I could see, since the number of participants are not pretty large in number, so I thought let me discuss one slide out of my presentation that we often forget, I repeat, planning and designing aspects of hospital. While we clean our instruments, we forget the person who are coming to renovate the hospital or to maintain the hospital. Are they cleaning the instruments? So for that, I will advise to all the participants, we can also use the ICRA tool, that is Infection Control Risk Assessment tool, even for planning and designing and construction and renovation of hospital. Because, you know, in COVID time, we were struggling for converting facility into COVID facilities, but we were taking the help of a lot of planners, even hospital engineers to convert these facilities. And we often realized there were frequent movements of personals. And we also see we have to convert a lot of general ward areas into the intensive care areas. At every point of time, we were imbibing a lot of dust, and perhaps we forgot to make the clear-cut dust control measures for organizations. So I just put a slide for your knowledge because we are short of time. This is my presentation I will share with all of you. And one of the last slide of this presentation, which is on infection control risk assessment tools, which we must know when we go for planning and designing and construction management of hospital, that we must go for these 4 practices. That is, first of all, identifying safe work practices at hospital, then focusing on clean clothing and tools, then third, engineering controls, and fourth is traffic control. Clearly speaking, once we talk of safe work practices, that means we must have daily safety briefing during construction and renovation at hospitals, planning for local exhaust and vacuum systems at hospital, and debris removal, you know, because debris is a big problem during construction and renovation. Then looking for the clean clothing and tools of the healthcare construction workers which are coming to our facilities. Then having good engineering controls for ventilation and HVAC systems, creating barrier systems for dust and debris control, then having good planning for traffic. That is not only planning for traffic of pedestrians, but for the vehicle and equipments. With this small slide, we are open for further discussion, and maybe among the speakers and participants, we can have some more discussion. Dr. Fatima, how much time we got? Dr. Fatima, how much time we got?
So we have 5 minutes more, and there are 2 questions in the chat box. Should I read it out to you?
Yeah, please.
The first question is, as an IPC personnel, what are the basic audit points to be checked? And the second is, in case of immunocompromised patient having an infectious disease, what kind of air changes is needed to protect the patient as well as the healthcare worker?
Okay. Okay.
These are in your chat box also, if you want to, or I can read it out again to you.
Yeah. Okay. Please read that again.
Okay. The first question is, as an IPC personnel, what are the basic audit points to be checked?
Okay. So I will say to you that first of all, whenever you are planning for infection control, okay, routine audit points you must be doing for a lot of activities, including surveillance and all these things. But from the IPC point of view, then you must develop a checklist for infection control risk assessment of any activity. Since this session is for construction and renovation of hospitals, you must develop a checklist of the spaces which are being looked for the renovation practices. For example, let's say starting for general renovation work, general construction work in a normal ward area towards going for much more construction work, much more renovation work into an intensive care area. So you must develop these ICRA checklists. That standard checklists are available into any of the, this good infection control website on the net. Plus, you can develop your own control tools so that we are following the best practices. Now, regarding second query we were talking.
The second question is, in case of an immunocompromised patient having an infectious disease, what kind of air changes is needed to protect the patient as well as the healthcare worker? Basically, she wants to ask about the kind of air changes to protect the other patients and to spread the disease to the healthcare worker in an immunocompromised patient.
So the good thing is that since we have got a system of this, this negative pressure isolation and positive pressure isolation also. In case of immunocompromised patient, as you know, patients who are getting bone marrow transplant or immunotherapies, like we have to maintain the positive pressure control inside the patient room. So planning for pure infection control measures will be supplemented by the positive pressure planning for that special patient care area where these patients are admitted. So as you must know, like bone marrow transplant patients or patients who got, immunocompromised diseases like HIV, all these things have to be planned also. Now question comes, big hospitals and big organizations are having pure HVAC systems whereby HVAC experts are able to modulate the air changes to make into a positive pressure area or a negative pressure area. So we can seek the help of these professionals. So they are creating more and more positive pressure area for these immunocompromised patients.
May I add to this? It calls for 6 air changes per hour with 2 fresh air changes. Thank you.
See, there is a rule for 6 for the knowledge of the house. We call the rule of 6 for air changes. Rule of 6 says 6 air changes per hour for a normal facility, 12 air changes per hour for a slightly more intensive facility, let's say a high dependence unit, and 4 times of the rule of 24 air changes for a intensive care facility or an operation theater area. Now, once we plan for an immunocompromised patient versus a patient who is bound to give infection to us, like tuberculosis patient who is bound to give infection for us, we call it the concept of positive pressure and negative pressure. That's an altogether different topic for discussion. Now, positive pressure means we need to have positive pressure inside the room. Like Dr. Harshvardhan told rightly, we need to have minimum 4 air changes per hour, 4 air changes for fresh air per hour into that room, almost like an operation theater area, like this. Similarly, if we got a negative pressure room, of course, negative pressure room is not recommended for immunocompromised patients. They are recommended for those patients which may bring infection from outside. Yeah, any more query?
No, sir, there are no further queries in the chat box. Sir, I would like to ask if there is any significance of graded pressure rooms.
Graded pressure rooms are recommended, but there's a doubt on graded pressure rooms. It's something like planning and designing for an intensive care, the planning and designing for a level 2 care, that is a high dependency unit, and then planning and designing for a other level, the level 3, that is a normal ward. Okay. So in medical parlance, we will say there is nothing like graded pressure rooms. People say, I will say rather we call it a progressive patient care. Patient who is having general ward care, going up to a high dependency care, going more up for an intensive care. So these facilities are having the inbuilt pressure changes. Like I told you, rule of six for a common man. 6-year changes, 12-year changes, going up to 24-year changes. That is for general ward to high dependency to intensive care. Now you can also understand, then you will certainly ask, what about the year changes for a normal OPD room? Or even for the household, like we are sitting at home also, we are having certain infection while we are having the room air conditioning at home. So for these areas, we recommend a 4, like the formula of 4. Like in a normal living area or an outpatient area, we should have at least 4 changes per hour. You understand my point? So graded chair and graded concept, we can say, yes, is important when we bring a patient of intensive care, when he become more, cured, to bringing him into slightly lesser facility of high dependency, finally taking him into normal ward, and finally taking him to home care.
May I add to something, if I'm allowed to?
Yes.
Yes.
In case of OT suite, there's a concept of graded pressure because there's a concept of zoning in the OT. So there is a concept of graded pressure variant in tandem with the zoning. Whole idea is that in no way there should be reverse airflow leading to intermingling of the SPMs or microbes from the lesser clean or unclean or lower zones to higher zones. So in an OT suite complex, when we design the layout plan, we design it from the concept of zoning, and also this concept of zoning is inbuilt inherently with the concept of graded pressure from higher to lower. So that that's another way of avoiding it.
That's right. Also, when we call our facility a suite, like OT is a suite. OT is having 4 areas, like the most sterile area and the most unsterile area. That is a disposal zone. Then we use the concept of graded air, but that is inbuilt into a single facility or single suite. Let's say OT is one area, But once we talk of patient care, intensive care is different from high dependency care, is different from the general ward care. So you see, in a planning and designing point of view, intensive care ward is different from high dependency. There are 2 different zones. General ward is a 3rd different zone. So these facilities are having separate air handling unit to maintain the air pressure. That is for the patient care. Now for a cocooned facility like operation theater, we will have a graded system so that the patient site for operation, that is the most sterile zone, we have got the highest sterile air with the function of highest pressure from the air handling unit, so that area become the most sterile zone. Even among the most sterile zone, I will share the patient, the site of incision on a patient when he's sitting, when he's lying on an operation theater table, is perhaps the most sterile zone, where we use the system of plenum air, or what you call this now, this specialized air for the OT, laminar airflow. So that sterile zone, among the sterile zone, again a system, the site of incision is the purest area from where we go toward the outer area and outer area and outer area, finally toward the disposal area, and finally coming out of the OT zone. I believe in the conference, they are having a discussion on the operation theater planning. If not here, then we may be including this topic into the next Hisicon, let's say Hisicon 2022 or like.
On behalf of Hisicon, I would like to thank all the speakers for such a great discussion and resolving all the queries. Thank you all and hope to have, yes, sir?
Yes, sir.
So thank you all. Thank you all on the
So you are
part of
muted. Please
Hisicon.
unmute. Please.
Thank you.
Not
Dr.
audible.
Hers, please unmute yourself.
May I
Yes,
say
sir. Yes, sir.
one
Please,
minute?
you were not audible.
No
initially.
issues. I just wanted to, wherever I go in any conference like this, maybe Hisicon itself or other platforms, I always convey that there are many guidelines, recommendations, SOPs from different bodies which have made a name for themselves. These guidelines are there to help you develop your insight, not to copy, because every healthcare organization has its own set of parameters, own set of resources, own set of circumstances, and own set of constraints. So an individual who has learned it scientifically, so he has an understanding and a way to look at. So for example, the question in the chat box, for the frequency of training of AHU or regular ACs, giving a straight jacket answer would be foolishness, because it depends a lot on the circumstance you're working, the level of care you're operating in, the bioload in the air that you expect in your setup, the suspended particle matters in your setup, the degree of humidity that you face. It varies in from month to month. There are many factors that go behind. There are thousand variables that impinge upon one point and give an output. So the entire aim of learning or having crisscross or being face to face in such conferences is to develop understanding, not to add to knowledge. And then that understanding has to be interpolated at your own setup with your own wisdom, keeping in mind the level of care, the resource constraint, the setup of the scientific parameters like humidity, temperature, SPMs in your specific settings. Then you can come to a conclusion or come to a solution or go for an intervention. You cannot just copy what is happening, what is the guideline with CDC or what is being practiced by Apollo or for the matter by the AIMS. No, you have to develop your insight and understanding by all these things and design your own solution for your setup. Thank you.
I think Dr. Harshvardhan said rightly, very rightly, because we are living into a resource poor setting into our country. And unfortunately, during COVID time, most of the people tried to copy the guidelines from Western world. They are a resource rich setting. We must understand we may be spending highest amount of resources in institutions like AIMS, Apollo, or PGI Lucknow. But if I see the villages of India also, where people are not knowing even the ABC of infection control for COVID prevention. So in one of the training sessions which I took for masses, my idea was to develop COVID appropriate behavior among the general masses, like this. Then I realized people are not knowing the difference between the general mask, cloth mask, even this N95 mask, and we talk of big things here. So as Dr. Harshad rightly also, we have got our Indian good resources, like we look for ASHA guidelines. We have got ISHRA guidelines in India, Indian Society for Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning guidelines. Similarly, HISI had developed good resource bank for guidelines. We can also learn from that also. Or nowadays, there is a concept for Make in India concept also. We should focus more on Indian guidelines, and maybe the platform like HISI can develop more and more SOPs and policies and procedure. Especially, we had a lot of learning from COVID very recently in 2020 and even 2021. So I thank you all the organizers and all my professional colleagues who have been here. And thank you, Dr. Fatima.
088. This 088.
Thank you, everybody.